"We want a man tonight," year giant Apache girls whisper to a lone rancher. Jack Harmon rode slowly along the dusty trail that led to his ranch, the sun sinking low behind the jagged peaks of the distant mountains. The evening air was dry and carried the scent of sagebrush, warm and slightly bitter. He had traveled this land for most of his life, but there was something about this journey that felt different. Maybe it was the quiet, almost too quiet, that settled over the hills as he approached the homestead. Or maybe it was the rumors he had heard earlier in town. A whisper of strange travelers, unusually tall women moving through the desert, their presence felt rather than seen. He shrugged the thought off, blaming it on his imagination or too many hours alone with only the wind for company. The ranch had been in Jack's family for generations. It was not large, but it was sturdy, built from weathered wood and stone that had stood the harshest storms the desert could throw. He had inherited it from his father, and before that, from his grandfather. He liked the solitude the place offered, a kind of freedom that could only be found when the horizon stretched endlessly in every direction. It was a hard life, but it was honest work, and Jack valued honesty above all else. As he rode past the dry creek bed, he noticed the usual signs of wildlife: scattered tracks, the scuttle of a lizard, the distant call of a hawk circling above. But something seemed out of place tonight. The tracks weren't familiar. They were too large, too deliberate. And then there was the silence. The desert, as lively as it could be during the day, seemed to hold its breath. Jack stopped his horse for a moment, squinting at the long shadows stretching across the rocky ground. He shook his head. "Nothing but my nerves," he muttered to himself. By the time he reached his cabin, the sky had turned a deep shade of orange, melting into purple and then into the soft blue of twilight. The ranch was quiet except for the low whistle of the wind through the canyon and the gentle clatter of the horses' hooves on the wooden posts of the corral. Jack dismounted and led his horse inside, securing the gates. He took a moment to run his hands along the saddle, feeling the familiar leather and metal, the tools of his trade. Even after all these years, these small rituals grounded him, reminding him of who he was and where he belonged. Jack entered his cabin, the smell of dry wood and old blankets greeting him like an old friend. He fed the horse and put away the tack, then set about lighting a small stove in the corner of the cabin. The fire flickered and warmed the room, casting shadows on the walls that danced with every movement. He sat in a wooden chair, letting out a long sigh, thinking about the day's work. Repairing a fence, checking the water troughs, and ensuring the livestock had enough feed for the coming week. Life on the ranch was never easy, but it was simple, and Jack appreciated simplicity more than anything. He leaned back in his chair, listening to the sounds outside. The wind had changed slightly, carrying with it the faint smell of earth and something else, something he couldn't place. A strange feeling settled over him, a mixture of curiosity and unease. He had lived in these parts long enough to trust his instincts, and they were telling him that tonight would not be like any other night he had spent alone on the ranch. Hours passed, the fire dying down to glowing embers. Jack prepared his dinner quickly, a simple meal of beans, bread, and a bit of cured meat. He ate in silence, the quiet of the desert pressing in on him. Outside, the stars began to emerge, scattered across the sky like tiny diamonds. Jack had always admired the night sky, the way it stretched endlessly, reminding him of both how small he was and how vast the world could be. He washed his hands and face with water from the barrel near the door and stepped outside for a moment. The air was cool now, brushing against his skin with the softness of night. That's when he first noticed them, shadows moving along the ridge above the ranch. At first he thought it might be a herd of deer or a group of coyotes, but the shapes were too tall, too human. He squinted, trying to make out more details, but the darkness played tricks on him. The shadows seemed to move with purpose, not the random wanderings of animals. Jack felt a chill run down his spine, not from fear, but from anticipation. Something was coming, and he knew he would have to face it alone, as he always did. He grabbed his lantern and stepped carefully down the slope to get a closer look. The light cut through the darkness, illuminating the ridge just enough to reveal the figures of several women, standing tall and poised, their eyes glinting even from a distance. Jack froze, unsure of what to do. They were unlike anyone he had ever seen, strong, confident, and commanding in their presence. Their movements were deliberate, almost graceful, Yet there was a wildness to them, a connection to the desert that made them seem untouchable. Jack's heart raced, not out of fear, but out of wonder. He had heard stories in the nearby town about Apache women, their courage and skill in surviving the harsh desert. But he had never expected to encounter them here, at his ranch, and in such numbers. They seemed to be watching him as much as he was watching them, assessing, evaluating. For a moment the world fell away, leaving only him, the women, and the endless desert stretching in every direction. One of the women stepped forward, her movements slow and deliberate. She raised a hand in greeting, and Jack, unsure of how to respond, nodded carefully. She smiled faintly, a gesture that seemed to carry both warmth and warning. The others mirrored her actions, forming a line along the ridge, their silhouettes framed by the fading light. Jack felt a strange mixture of awe and responsibility. He was alone, yet he sensed that this encounter was significant, that the night would demand more from him than he had ever given before. He returned to his cabin, but sleep would not come easily. He paced the room, listening to the desert, listening to the wind, and imagining the stories these women might carry with them. He wondered why they had come, what they wanted, and how he would respond. The night seemed to stretch endlessly, each moment filled with tension and possibility. Jack knew that by morning nothing would be the same. He had always lived a quiet life, but tonight he felt the stirrings of something new, something powerful. Outside, the wind whispered through the canyon, carrying faint echoes of voices too soft to understand. Jack stood at the doorway, lantern in hand, gazing toward the ridge. The stars shone brightly above, and the desert seemed alive in a way it never had before. The women remained on the ridge, still and watchful, their presence both mysterious and magnetic. Jack felt a strange sense of connection, as though the night itself had brought them to him for a purpose he could not yet comprehend. He sighed, knowing that whatever came next, he would face it with the same determination that had carried him through every hardship of his life. The ranch was his home, the desert his companion, and the night held secrets he had yet to uncover. Jack Harmon, the lone rancher, was ready. He had always been ready. The night deepened over Jack Harmon's ranch. The stars sparkled in the wide desert sky, and a gentle wind rustled through the sagebrush. Jack could hear the faint chirping of crickets and the occasional distant howl of a coyote, but the ranch felt heavier somehow, as if the desert itself were holding its breath. The shadows on the ridge above had not moved for some time, yet Jack could not shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every sound, every flicker of movement, seemed amplified in the stillness of the night. He stepped outside, lantern in hand, and scanned the ridge again. The figures of the women were still there, tall and poised, their outlines clear against the faint glow of moonlight. Jack had spent much of his life alone in the wilderness, and he had learned to read the desert and its creatures, but these women were different. They moved with a purpose and a confidence that made the hair on his arms stand on end. They were not like the people he knew from the nearby town or the occasional travelers who passed through. There was a strength in them, both in body and spirit, that seemed connected to the land itself. He took a slow step forward, testing the ground beneath his boots. The desert was hard and dry, but it carried the faint scent of herbs and flowers he did not recognize. The women watched him, silent and still, and Jack realized that any sudden movement might be seen as a challenge. He raised his hand slightly in a gesture of respect, and one of them, the tallest, inclined her head in response. It was a small acknowledgement, but it carried weight.
"Who are you?" he called softly, his voice barely rising above the whispering wind. The woman stepped closer, her movements deliberate, and spoke in a voice that was both strong and gentle.
We are travelers, she said. We move with the wind and the land. We come not to harm, but to seek. Jack frowned, unsure what she meant by seek. Seek what? He asked cautiously. The woman's eyes glinted in the moonlight, and she smiled faintly. A companion for the night. A man who understands the desert, its dangers, and its rhythms. Someone who can be trusted. Jack's heart beat faster. The words were strange and unexpected, and yet they carried no threat. He felt a mixture of curiosity and caution. He had spent years alone, and encounters like this were rare. But he also knew that the desert demanded respect, and trust could not be given lightly. He lowered his lantern slightly, letting the soft glow illuminate the ground between them. "Why me?" he asked, his voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. The woman's gaze softened. "We do not choose lightly," she said. "We sense those who are strong, those who are honest and capable. You have lived with the land, and the land speaks of you." Jack swallowed hard. He had always been proud of his independence and his ability to survive alone, but never had he imagined that such qualities would draw attention like this. He nodded slowly, unsure of what to say next. Words seemed insufficient. The other women began to step down from the ridge, moving with the grace of someone completely at home in the desert. Each was tall and strong, their features sharp and striking, yet their presence was calm and unthreatening. They formed a loose circle around Jack, their eyes observing him carefully. He could see the faint scars and weathered hands that spoke of hard lives spent enduring the harshness of the wilderness. And yet, there was a softness in their expressions, a curiosity that mirrored his own. One of the women, slightly shorter than the others but no less commanding, approached Jack and spoke. "You are wary," she said. "That is wise. Trust must be earned, and fear must be respected. But we are not your enemies. We need only guidance, protection, and understanding." Jack nodded again, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. He had faced many challenges alone in the desert. Wildfires, storms, predators. But this was different. This was a test not of physical strength alone, but of character, of patience, of the ability to connect and understand. He felt a strange sense of anticipation, a recognition that the night held lessons he could not yet name. "Come!" the tall woman said finally, gesturing toward a flat area near the edge of the ridge. "Sit with us. Talk with us. Let us see if you are the one we seek." Jack hesitated only for a moment before following her. The ground was uneven and rocky, but he moved carefully, his boots crunching softly against the desert soil. The women arranged themselves around a small clearing, forming a semicircle that felt protective rather than intimidating. He noticed small details, the way they carried themselves, the careful observation of their surroundings, the quiet communication between them through glances and gestures. It was a rhythm he had not encountered before, a silent harmony born from experience and trust. As they settled, the women began to speak in low tones, sharing fragments of their lives and experiences. They spoke of the desert, of the mountains, of the challenges they faced in traveling through such a harsh environment. Jack listened intently, fascinated by their stories and the way they spoke with both strength and vulnerability. Each tale revealed courage, endurance, and an unspoken code of respect for the land and for one another. Jack found himself sharing stories of his own life, the ranch, his work with the animals, the long hours spent alone in the wilderness. He spoke of the storms he had endured, the times he had faced danger, and the quiet moments when the desert had seemed almost alive around him. The women listened, nodding and occasionally asking questions, their interest genuine. For the first time in many years, Jack felt the weight of companionship, a connection that was not forced but natural, born of shared understanding and mutual respect. The night grew deeper, and the wind whispered through the canyon with a gentle rhythm. Jack noticed that the women were alert, scanning the horizon even as they spoke, their instincts finely tuned to the desert around them. They spoke of the importance of awareness, of knowing when to act and when to wait, and Jack realized that this was as much a lesson as it was a test. He began to understand that their presence was not merely social, it was a challenge to his judgment, his patience, and his ability to respond thoughtfully.
At one point, the tall woman who had first spoken to him leaned forward slightly.
"You are different from others we have met," she said. "You do not rush. You do not pretend. You listen and watch. That is what we need." Jack nodded, feeling a mixture of pride and humility. He had spent a lifetime learning from the land, from the animals, from the quiet moments when survival depended on awareness and patience. And now, it seemed, those lessons were being recognized in a way he had never imagined. Time passed slowly, each moment filled with small gestures, quiet conversation, and shared observation. The women demonstrated skills subtly, how to move silently, how to recognize signs of danger, how to prepare for sudden changes in weather. Jack watched and learned, realizing that the night was not about dominance or fear, but about respect, understanding, and cooperation. He felt a growing admiration for these women, not only for their physical strength, but for their wisdom, resilience, and ability to navigate the world with confidence and care. As the hours stretched on, the initial tension began to ease, replaced by a calm awareness of shared presence. Jack felt a connection forming, not born of words alone, but of the unspoken understanding that comes from facing the unknown together. The women, too, seemed to sense his sincerity and steadiness, responding with gestures and glances that conveyed trust and appreciation. Finally, the tall woman spoke again, her voice soft but firm. "The night is long, and the desert is unforgiving. But we have found value in your company, Jack Harmon. You understand more than most, and that is why we are here." Jack nodded, feeling a profound sense of recognition. He understood now that this encounter was not accidental. The desert had guided them together, testing, observing, and ultimately connecting them. He realized that the night would continue to challenge him, but he was ready. He had faced the wilderness alone, and now he faced a different kind of challenge, one of trust, respect, and understanding. As the moon climbed higher in the sky, casting silver light over the rugged landscape, Jack felt the first true sense of anticipation he had experienced in years. The shadows on the ridge were no longer merely mysterious. They were alive with purpose, curiosity, and intelligence. He knew that the night was only beginning, and that the lessons and experiences to come would leave a lasting impression on him. He settled near the women, ready to observe, ready to learn, and ready to connect. The desert stretched endlessly around them, a silent witness to the unfolding encounter. And for the first time in many years, Jack Harmon felt that he was not entirely alone, that the night held promise, mystery, and the possibility of something extraordinary. The desert night was quiet, but the calm was deceptive. Jack Harmon sat with the Apache women, feeling the weight of their presence and the subtle power that radiated from them. He had spent hours listening to their stories and observing their movements, learning more about their lives and the land than he ever had from books or other people. But now, he realized, the night was moving into a new phase, a phase that would test not only his patience but his courage, his instincts, and his ability to act wisely. The tallest woman, the one who had first approached him, rose slowly and looked toward the horizon. "Jack Harmon," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the still air. "To understand us fully, to be trusted, you must face the desert as we do. You must see through our eyes, move with our steps, and learn the ways of the land at night." Jack's brow furrowed. He had lived in the desert for decades, but the idea of following their methods and proving himself was both challenging and intriguing. "What do I need to do?" he asked. "You will follow us," she said simply. "You will observe, you will listen, and you will act when the time comes. The desert is unforgiving, Jack. You must be ready to respond with thought, speed, and care." Without hesitation, the women began to move down the slope, their steps silent yet deliberate. Jack followed, careful not to make any sudden noises. The ground was rough and uneven, scattered with rocks and small shrubs. He felt the wind brush past his face and heard the occasional whisper of dry leaves underfoot. The women's movements were precise, almost like a dance with the desert, and Jack struggled to keep up. Yet he could not help but admire their skill, the way they seemed perfectly in tune with the world around them. As they walked, the tallest woman spoke softly. "There are dangers in every shadow, threats that move unseen. Tonight is about trust and understanding, about knowing when to act and when to wait. Watch carefully, Jack. Learn." They stopped suddenly near a small ridge overlooking a narrow canyon. Jack could see the faint glimmer of moonlight reflecting off rocks below. "See that?" one of the women asked, pointing toward movement near a cluster of boulders. Jack squinted and saw what appeared to be small desert animals, foxes, rabbits, and the occasional lizard. The women observed them closely, noting patterns of movement and subtle shifts in the sand.
"You must understand the rhythm of the land," the tallest woman said. "It is not enough to see danger. You must know when it comes and when it passes. You must sense it, feel it, and respect it."
Jack nodded, trying to focus on the details. He noticed the animals' reactions to even the slightest sound or change in light. He realized that the women's lessons were about more than just survival. They were about patience, awareness, and the ability to act wisely in uncertain situations. After some time, the women motioned for him to follow further down the canyon. The terrain became steeper with loose rocks and sudden drops. Jack moved carefully, his muscles tense and alert. He understood that this was a test of his balance, coordination, and concentration. One misstep could mean injury, but the women's calm presence encouraged him to focus rather than fear. They reached a small clearing near a hidden spring, the sound of water trickling faintly in the night. The women stopped and gestured for Jack to join them.
"Here you must prove your ability to act under pressure," the tallest woman said. "There are tasks that require strength, precision, and judgment. We will observe and you will demonstrate what you have learned." Jack looked around, uncertain at first. The women handed him a small bundle of equipment, ropes, a lantern, and a few tools for navigation and survival. "Use these wisely," one of the women said. "Your choices will show us your character. You must move carefully, plan, and act with thought. There is no room for recklessness here."
The first task was simple in words, but difficult in execution. Jack was to carry a small amount of water from the spring to a set of containers across uneven ground, avoiding spillage while keeping balance. At first, he struggled, the water sloshing in the container and threatening to tip over as he climbed the slope. The women watched silently, their eyes evaluating his every move. Jack realized that his usual confidence alone would not be enough. He needed patience, control, and mindfulness. Slowly, carefully, he adjusted his steps, feeling the rhythm of the ground beneath his boots and the weight of the water in his hands.
By the time he reached the containers, he had managed to pour most of the water without spilling. The women nodded in approval, acknowledging his effort with small smiles and gestures of encouragement.
Jack felt a surge of pride, not just in completing the task, but in understanding the lessons hidden within it. The next task tested his awareness. The women scattered small objects around the clearing, rocks, sticks, and other natural markers.
Jack was asked to retrieve each one while avoiding the attention of a simulated predator represented by subtle movements and sounds made by the women themselves.
At first he stumbled, unaware of the cues and too focused on the objects, but gradually he began to notice the subtle signs, the shifting shadows, the sound of a rock moving slightly, the faint rustle of a branch. He learned to move quietly, adjust his posture, and anticipate the environment. By the end, he had successfully retrieved every object, demonstrating not only skill but growing awareness of the desert's hidden dangers. The final challenge came unexpectedly. One of the women pointed toward the ridge, where the faint glint of moonlight revealed a cluster of jagged rocks.
"There may be threats here," she said. "You must protect the group if danger appears. Move carefully and act with precision."
Every shadow seemed alive, every rustle in the wind a potential threat. He felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, knowing that the women were relying on him to observe, react, and protect. He moved slowly, scanning the area, listening to every sound, feeling the desert around him. Suddenly, a rock shifted slightly, revealing a small desert fox. Jack froze for a moment, then relaxed, realizing there was no danger. He signaled to the women, showing that he had assessed the situation correctly. They smiled faintly, acknowledging his judgment.
"You see beyond what is obvious," the tallest woman said.
"That is what we seek. You understand more than you realize, Jack Harmon." By the time the night reached its deepest hour, Jack felt a profound sense of accomplishment.
He had faced challenges he could never have imagined in his usual life on the ranch, yet he had adapted, learned, and succeeded. The women, too, seemed pleased, their eyes reflecting approval and quiet admiration.
They gathered around the small clearing, and the tallest woman spoke once more. You have proven your strength, your awareness, and your character. The desert has tested you, and you have met its challenges. You have earned our trust, Jack Harmon."
Jack nodded, feeling a mix of relief, pride, and humility. He realized that this night had been about more than tasks or tests. It had been about connection, understanding, and mutual respect.
The women had challenged him not to dominate or control, but to listen, observe, and respond thoughtfully. In doing so, he had discovered qualities in himself that he had not fully recognized before.
The night air began to cool, carrying the faint scent of desert flowers and earth. Jack and the women moved back toward the small ridge overlooking the ranch, their steps lighter now, filled with a quiet sense of accomplishment. The shadows that had once seemed mysterious now felt familiar, almost welcoming. The desert, which had appeared harsh and unforgiving, now seemed to pulse with life, offering lessons and guidance to those willing to observe and respect its rhythms. Jack looked around at the women, noticing their smiles and subtle gestures of approval.
He understood that this was not the end of the night's lessons, but a turning point, a moment in which trust had been earned and connections had begun to form.
He felt a growing admiration for these women, not only for their strength and skill, but for their wisdom, patience, and ability to guide without commanding. As the first hints of dawn began to touch the horizon, Jack realized that the night had changed him. He had faced challenges that tested his body, mind, and spirit. He had learned to move with awareness, to observe with patience, and to act with thought. And most importantly, he had begun to understand the depth of connection and trust that could exist between people who meet under extraordinary circumstances. The women gathered near the ridge, preparing to rest for the remaining hours of the night. Jack stayed nearby, reflecting on the experience and feeling a sense of gratitude for the lessons he had received.
The desert stretched endlessly around them, silent and eternal, holding secrets and challenges for those willing to seek them.
For the first time in many years, Jack Harmon felt not just alive, but part of something larger than himself. He understood that the night's trials were only the beginning, and that the bonds he was forming with these remarkable women would shape the experiences yet to come. And as the wind whispered softly through the canyon, carrying the scents and sounds of the desert, Jack felt a quiet certainty. He was ready for whatever the night might bring next. The first pale light of dawn began to touch the edges of the distant mountains, turning the desert sky into shades of pink, gold, and soft purple. Jack Harmon sat quietly on a rocky outcrop, watching the horizon and listening to the wind as it swept gently across the sagebrush. The night had been long and challenging, filled with tests, lessons, and quiet observation. He could feel the dust of the desert clinging to his skin, his muscles sore from climbing and moving through uneven terrain, yet his mind was alive in a way it hadn't been in years. The Apache women moved around the small clearing, their gestures calm and deliberate. Despite the previous hours of testing and challenges, their demeanor had softened, and there was a gentle warmth in the way they interacted with each other and with Jack. It was as if the desert itself had shifted its rhythm, now welcoming a rare moment of peace. Jack felt a deep sense of connection, realizing that the night had not just been about proving himself. It had been about forming a bond of understanding, mutual respect, and trust. One of the women approached him with a small bundle of food, dried fruits, flatbread, and fresh water from a hidden spring.
"Eat, Jack," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You need strength for what comes next. The night may be over, but the day brings new opportunities to learn from the land and from each other."
Jack accepted the food with gratitude, sitting cross-legged on the ground as he ate. He noticed the way the women watched him, not with judgment or expectation, but with genuine interest and quiet encouragement. It was a strange feeling to be so observed, yet so accepted, to feel part of a group that was at once independent and connected, strong yet open. He had spent years alone, and he had never experienced this delicate balance of freedom and companionship. After a moment, the tallest woman, the one who had first approached him, sat beside him.
"Jack Harmon," she said, "tonight you showed courage, patience, and understanding, but there is more to this desert than challenge. There is also life, joy, and the quiet beauty of being present. You must learn to see that as well."
Jack nodded slowly. He understood the meaning behind her words.
The desert was not merely a place of survival. It was a place of reflection, connection, and subtle wonders.
The tests of the night had been necessary to gauge his readiness, but now it was time to experience the softer lessons, the stories, the laughter, and the shared moments that created bonds stronger than fear or skill.
They moved together toward a flat area near the edge of a small canyon, where the rising sun illuminated the landscape in soft gold. The women began to share more of their personal stories, their voices low and melodic, carrying the history of generations and the wisdom of their people. They spoke of childhood spent learning to hunt, to read the signs of the desert, and to survive in a world that could be both beautiful and unforgiving. They spoke of family, loss, joy, and the quiet moments of reflection that shaped their lives. Jack listened intently, fascinated by their words. He asked questions, not out of doubt, but out of genuine curiosity, seeking to understand the experiences that had made these women who they were.
Each story revealed strength, resilience, and a deep connection to the land. And as they spoke, Jack felt the beginnings of a bond that went beyond words, a shared understanding of life's challenges, the beauty of nature, and the value of trust and respect.
At one point, a woman began to hum a soft tune, a melody that seemed to rise from the desert itself. The sound was soothing, carrying with it the rhythm of the wind, the rustle of leaves, and the distant call of birds awakening to the morning. Jack felt a calm settle over him, a quiet peace that contrasted with the tension of the night. He realized that this was as much a lesson as the challenges had been, that strength alone was not enough. Understanding, empathy, and harmony with the world around him were equally important. They sat together for hours, sharing stories, food, and quiet moments of reflection. Jack began to notice small gestures. The way the women glanced at each other to communicate silently. The way they moved with confidence yet with care. The way they respected the space of each individual while maintaining a sense of unity. He realized that these moments were teaching him more than any physical challenge could. They were teaching him about human connection, the subtle art of listening, and the value of shared experience. As the sun climbed higher, warming the desert rocks and casting long shadows across the sand, Jack felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had entered the night wary and uncertain, unsure of what to expect, and yet he had emerged with new understanding, new skills, and a bond that felt meaningful and enduring. He realized that the women's presence was not only a test but also a gift, a chance to see life through different eyes, to understand courage and wisdom in ways he had never imagined. One of the women, noticing Jack's thoughtful expression, spoke softly.
"You see the desert differently now, do you not?" she asked.
"I do," he said. "It is more alive than I realized."
Not just with challenges, but with stories, with life, and with people who understand it deeply.
Strength is important, yes, but so is understanding. Courage without awareness can be reckless. Patience without empathy can be lonely. You have shown both, Jack Harmon, and for that, we respect you. Jack felt a warmth spread through him, a sense of being seen and understood in a way he rarely experienced. He had faced dangers, climbed ridges, and learned lessons from the desert for years, but never had he felt such a deep connection to both the land and the people around him. The women's trust was a powerful affirmation, and it gave him confidence, not arrogance, but a quiet certainty that he could face what lay ahead with wisdom and care. As the morning continued, the women began to show Jack small, practical skills that went beyond the challenges of the night. They demonstrated how to find hidden sources of water, how to identify plants useful for food or medicine, and how to move quietly across the desert without disturbing the natural rhythm of life. Jack absorbed each lesson eagerly, practicing alongside them and learning to see the desert in ways he had never considered. He noticed subtle signs of wildlife, changes in the wind, and the way the sun's position affected temperature and visibility. Each small observation felt like a key unlocking a hidden part of the world he thought he knew so well. Between lessons, they laughed together. Small jokes, teasing comments, and shared observations brought lightness to the intense focus of the morning. Jack found himself smiling in a way he hadn't in years, appreciating the combination of humor, skill, and shared understanding. The women's presence was at once comforting and inspiring, teaching him that connection and joy could coexist with discipline and awareness.
By midday, Jack realized that he had learned as much about himself as he had about the desert.
He had discovered patience, empathy, and resilience in ways the tests of the night had prepared him for. He had discovered the value of listening, observing, and responding with care. And he had discovered the profound sense of fulfillment that comes from shared experience, from connecting with people whose lives and perspectives expand your understanding of the world. The women gathered once more, forming a loose circle as the sun reached its peak.
Jack Harmon, the tallest woman said, her voice carrying a calm authority, you have walked with us through the night and into the morning. You have learned, observed, and connected. You have shown courage, patience, and understanding. These are the qualities we value most, and they are the qualities that will guide you in all your journeys. Jack nodded, feeling a quiet sense of pride and gratitude. Thank you, he said simply. I have learned more in these hours than I ever imagined. I am grateful for your guidance and your trust.
The women smiled, their expressions warm and approving. For a moment, the desert seemed to hold its breath, as if acknowledging the bonds that had been formed, the lessons that had been shared, and the growth that had taken place. Jack felt a deep sense of belonging, not in the sense of ownership or possession, but in the sense of connection, understanding, and mutual respect. As the morning progressed, they began to prepare for the next phase of the day. The women packed their small belongings and moved with quiet efficiency, demonstrating teamwork, coordination, and the ability to adapt to changing circumstances. Jack followed, assisting where he could, feeling a sense of shared purpose and unity. The desert around them was alive with light, shadow, and subtle movement, a constant reminder that the world was full of lessons waiting to be discovered by those willing to observe and learn. By the time they returned to the small ridge overlooking Jack's ranch, he felt transformed.
The night and morning had been a journey through challenge, observation, and connection.
He had faced tests, learned new skills, and formed bonds that would remain with him long after the women returned to their travels. He had discovered qualities within himself that he had not fully recognized, and he had experienced the rare and powerful feeling of being understood and respected by others who shared a deep connection to the land. Sitting together in the warm morning sun, Jack and the women shared a quiet moment of reflection. The wind whispered through the canyon, carrying the scents and sounds of the desert. Jack looked at each woman in turn, feeling admiration, respect, and a sense of kinship that transcended words. He understood that this bond was built on trust, understanding, and shared experience, and that it would continue to shape him in ways he could not yet fully see. The desert stretched endlessly around them, a living testament to resilience, patience, and connection. And in that moment, Jack Harmon realized that the night's challenges and the morning's lessons had prepared him not just for survival, but for a deeper understanding of life, people, and the land he had always called home. The sun climbed higher in the sky, bathing the desert in warm golden light that made the rocks and sagebrush glow. Jack Harmon stood on the ridge overlooking his ranch, watching the Apache women as they moved with quiet precision. There was a rhythm to their steps, a harmony with the land that he could only admire. The night and morning had been unlike anything he had ever experienced, filled with lessons, challenges, and moments of deep connection. Now, as daylight stretched across the desert, he realized that the encounter was nearing its close. The women gathered in a small circle, their expressions calm but filled with a subtle emotion he could not yet name. Jack felt a mix of pride, sadness, and gratitude.
Oh, pride for having faced the tests of the night and earned their trust, sadness because he knew the encounter was temporary, and gratitude for having been part of something rare and meaningful.
The desert around them was quiet, as if holding its breath one last time, honoring the bond that had been formed. The tallest woman, the one who had guided him through the night and morning, stepped forward. Her eyes met his, steady and full of understanding. "Jack Harmon," she said softly, "our time here is coming to an end.
We must return to our journey, to our people, and to the land that calls us. But know this, what we shared, what you have learned, and the trust we have given are yours to carry.
Use them wisely." Jack nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. Words seemed inadequate for what he wanted to express. He had always been a man of action, not speech, but he felt the weight of the moment pressing on him.
I will remember, he said simply. Everything you have taught me, everything I have learned tonight and this morning, it will stay with me.
Thank you for trusting me. The women smiled faintly, acknowledging his words. There was a quiet dignity in the way they moved, a grace that reflected both strength and wisdom. Jack realized that their presence was more than physical. They had brought insight, guidance, and understanding into his life in a way that no other experience had. The desert, the night, and the challenges had been a teacher, but these women had been the true guides. One of the younger women approached Jack and placed a small hand on his shoulder. "You are a good man," she said softly. "Strong, patient, and careful. The desert has tested many, but it has chosen you. Remember that you are part of its story now, as it is part of yours." Jack felt warmth spread through him at her words. He had spent most of his life alone, relying on his skills and instincts to survive. But tonight, he understood something deeper: the importance of connection, trust, and mutual respect. He had learned that strength alone was not enough. It had to be paired with wisdom, patience, and empathy. And he had seen in the women a reflection of what was possible when life was approached with balance, understanding, and care. The women began to prepare to leave, packing their few belongings with quiet efficiency. Jack assisted where he could, feeling a sense of shared purpose. Even in this final act, there was a lesson. Life required cooperation, attention, and mindfulness. Every movement mattered, and every action contributed to the rhythm of survival and harmony. He realized that this awareness would guide him not only on the ranch but in all aspects of life. Before they left, the tallest woman turned to him once more. "Do not fear the solitude of your land, Jack Harmon," she said. "It is a gift, a place to grow, reflect, and prepare. But remember what you have learned here. Connection, understanding, and respect are the true treasures. Carry them with you, and your life will be richer for it." Jack nodded, feeling a deep sense of acceptance. He understood that this encounter had changed him, shaping not only his skills but his perspective on life. The desert had always been a teacher, but now he had experienced the profound impact of trust, companionship, and shared understanding. He knew that the memory of this night and morning would stay with him, guiding him in ways he could not yet fully predict. The women began to move toward the ridge, their tall figures cutting clear silhouettes against the brightening sky. Jack watched them, feeling a mixture of awe and admiration. They were strong, independent, and deeply connected to the land. And now, in some small way, he felt connected to them as well. The desert seemed to acknowledge the moment, the wind whispering softly through the canyon and the rocks gleaming in the morning light. Jack remained on the ridge for a long while, watching as the women disappeared over the horizon, their forms blending with the rugged landscape. He felt a quiet sense of completion, as if the night, the morning, and their lessons had all led to this moment. He understood that life on the ranch would return to its familiar rhythm, but he himself had been changed. The skills, patience, and awareness he had developed would remain, and the memory of the women's presence would be a source of inspiration and reflection for years to come. He turned back toward the ranch, his steps slow and deliberate. The wind carried the faint scent of sagebrush and earth, reminding him of the lessons he had learned: to move with awareness, to observe with patience, and to act with care. Each step felt significant, a continuation of the journey that had begun long before he had met the women, yet now shaped by their guidance and trust. When he returned to the cabin, Jack took a moment to sit quietly, reflecting on the past hours. He thought of the tests, the challenges, and the shared moments of understanding. He remembered the way the women had moved, the subtle communication between them, and the trust they had placed in him. He realized that life was full of fleeting encounters, moments that could change the course of understanding, skill, and connection. And he understood that he had been fortunate to experience one of those rare, transformative moments. The afternoon passed slowly, the sun climbing high and then beginning its descent toward the mountains. Jack worked quietly around the ranch, repairing fences, checking water troughs, and tending to the animals. Yet his mind was often on the night and morning that had passed. He thought of the women, their strength,
their wisdom, and their trust.
He felt gratitude for the lessons they had taught him, for the connection they had shared, and for the quiet reminder that life was more than survival. It was understanding, respect, and the bonds we form along the way. As the sun began to sink behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the desert, Jack took one last look at the ridge where the women had disappeared. The landscape was silent, vast, and beautiful, holding both challenges and lessons for those who were willing to see. He felt a quiet smile on his face, a recognition of the journey he had undertaken and the growth he had achieved. The desert, the night, and the women had all left their mark on him, shaping not only his skills but his understanding of life itself. Jack sat by the cabin door as twilight fell, the sky turning shades of purple and pink. The wind whispered through the sagebrush, carrying faint echoes of the past night. He thought about the lessons, the challenges, and the shared moments, feeling a sense of fulfillment and connection that went beyond words. For the first time in years, he felt fully present, fully alive, and deeply aware of the harmony between himself, the land, and the people who had shared this extraordinary experience with him. As darkness settled over the desert, Jack lit a small lamp inside his cabin and sat quietly, reflecting on the encounter. He knew that life would continue in its usual rhythm, with the work of the ranch and the solitude of the desert, but he also knew that he had been touched by something rare and transformative. The memory of the Apache women, their trust, their guidance, and the lessons they had shared would remain with him, guiding him in ways he could not yet fully see. He leaned back in his chair, feeling the warmth of the lamp and the quiet strength of the night surrounding him. Jack understood now that the experience had been about much more than testing his abilities.
It had been about connection, understanding, and the deep unspoken bonds that form when people meet under extraordinary circumstances. He realized that these bonds, once formed, could guide, support, and inspire long after the encounter itself had ended.
The wind outside whispered softly through the canyon, carrying the scents and sounds of the desert. Jack closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, feeling the presence of the land and the lessons it had offered him. He thought of the women, their strength, their wisdom, and their kindness, and he felt a deep sense of gratitude. The night, the morning, and the experience as a whole had left an indelible mark on him, shaping his understanding of life, connection, and the world around him. As the stars began to appear in the sky once more, Jack Harmon sat quietly, reflecting on the journey that had brought him here.
He knew that the memory of this night and morning would stay with him forever, guiding his actions, his decisions, and his understanding of the land and the people who inhabit it.
And he knew that he had been part of something rare and extraordinary, a moment of connection, trust, and mutual respect that would shape his life in ways both seen and unseen. Jack Harmon, the lone rancher, had faced the desert, its challenges, and its lessons. He had been tested, guided, and connected. And now, as the night fully settled over the land, he understood that he had been changed forever. The experience had given him more than knowledge or skill. It had given him perspective, trust, and the quiet, enduring understanding that life's most profound lessons often come from the unexpected, the fleeting, and the extraordinary.